Hello, and thanks for coming to my presentation today. My name's Bob Ashcroft, and I work at Tokai University in Sapporo. Since the start of the pandemic, we had to suddenly switch over to online teaching. Did you find it stressful? Do you think that teaching online is inherently more stressful than regular face-to-face teaching? Well, that certainly was my experience, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I started to notice negative effects on my emotional condition and well-being. I'd already been using Stoic philosophy for several years in everyday life just to reduce the intensity and frequency of negative emotional states, with some success. At the beginning of last year, I decided to tailor Stoic principles specifically to help cope with the online teaching environment. My research set out to address the following questions. What are the negative effects of teaching online on subjective well-being? What causes these negative effects? What are teachers doing to mediate these negative effects? Can practicing Stoic techniques alleviate these negative effects? I've divided my talk into 4 parts. First, teacher well-being survey. Next, Stoic techniques for teachers. And then my experimental design. And finally, the results and conclusions. So let's get started with the teacher well-being survey. So I used Google Forms and posted it to the Facebook forum Online Teachers in Japan, OTJ, during the last week of June this year. I asked teachers about their experience from the onset of the pandemic, and 96 university teachers responded. The questionnaire was divided into 3 sections. The first was about the negative effect of online teaching on subjective well-being. Teachers had to respond to these prompts on a 4-point Likert scale, from 1, disagree, to 4, agree. A response of 3 or 4 on the scale was counted as agreement with the prompt. Almost half of the respondents reported that teaching online had negatively affected their emotional state or mental health. Also, teaching online made some of the teachers feel disconnected from other people, with 66 in agreement. 54 teachers said that they occasionally felt lonely from teaching online. 50 teachers said that they had increased levels of stress due to online teaching. And teaching online occasionally made 37 teachers feel angry. And 32 teachers from 96 said that online teaching they felt more anxious online teaching than teaching face-to-face. In the next section of the questionnaire, I asked about the causes of these effects. Respondents were presented with 11 possible causes and asked again to agree or disagree on the same scale. So 60 teachers said that reduced contact with students was a source of stress. 60 teachers also agreed that increased workload was a source of stress. And other causes, in order of the number of respondents, was increased preparation time, reduced contact with colleagues, blurred lines between work and home, work-life balance issues, unfamiliar technology, uncertainty about the future, feelings of isolation, irregular hours, and a feeling of loss of control. So we can see that a variety of different factors related to online teaching had negatively affected the teachers in the sample. Section 2 of the questionnaire also included an open-ended question where teachers could name additional causes of negative effects. So I grouped the answers into categories of similar causes. And you can see the categories, the resultant categories here. So the most common response with 10 teachers was a poor level of support from superiors. 8 teachers said they felt impaired physical health and a reduced level of exercise caused them stress. Then 7 teachers said technology limitations. Poor student behavior was from 5 teachers. Increased screen time from 3. And then unfair work apportionment, degeneration of relationship with colleagues, and tiredness and fatigue. In the last section, I included one open-ended question asking teachers to list any strategies that they were using to offset the negative effects from teaching online. Again, I categorized the responses. And here's a summary of the categories and their frequencies. As you can see, the most common coping strategy was exercise. 31 teachers out of the sample of 96 said that exercise had helped them cope with teaching online. Popular types of exercise included running, walking, hiking, cycling, and going to the gym. Other coping strategies were appreciating the positives, networking and reaching out to colleagues and friends, non-work related activities, so doing something different, and trying to separate work and home life. One teacher said that when he was teaching classes at home, he wore a shirt and took it off and put a t-shirt on when it was time to play with the kids. Adjusting class format was from 7 respondents. For example, taking it in turns between doing live classes and on demand. Alcohol use was also cited by 6 teachers, empathizing with students, meditation as well, limiting computer time, setting limits, regular sleep, and diet as well. Okay, so that was the survey. Next, let's move on to Stoic techniques for teachers. So just like many of the teachers in the survey, I'd started to look around for ways of reducing the levels of stress and frustration that I was feeling with the new teaching situation. As I said earlier, I'd already been using Stoic philosophy for several years in everyday life. And at the beginning of last year, I decided to tailor Stoic principles specifically to help me with the online teaching environment. As teachers, we all know that thinking about what could go wrong during a class in advance helps us to come up with contingencies to lessen their impact or to prevent them from happening in the first place. But the Roman Stoics had a less obvious reason for thinking about undesirable things happening. Seneca and Epictetus both claimed that thinking about negative outcomes in advance lessens their emotional impact. No matter how much forethought we give to the prevention of things going wrong during a class, they inevitably will at some stage. And this seems to be particularly true of teaching online. Considering what could go wrong for an upcoming online class can help reduce the negative emotional effect if, or rather when, such an outcome actually happens. But there's another advantage of considering what could go wrong in advance. And it's that it makes us more appreciative of the things that are actually going well. The Roman Stoics recognized that the key to satisfaction was wanting the things that we've already got, and they devised a way of doing this. It's called negative visualization. I've adapted it specifically for teachers, teacher negative visualization, or TMV for short, and here's how it works. There are 2 stages. First, you should list the components of your teaching and working environment which you value. For example, here I divided my environment into 5 categories: students, facilities, institution, colleagues, and admin. And then I made some notes on some of the things that I valued in each category. This first stage makes you bring to mind the elements which you hold dear about your teaching and working situation. In the second stage of TMV, you should spend some time, about 10 minutes is fine, imagining what your life would be like if some or all of these components were suddenly taken away. You should consider how the situation would degenerate in the absence of some or all of the things on your list. The second step of TMV helps you feel more appreciative of the components on the list that you created in step 1. Okay, so that's technique number 1, teacher negative visualization. The second technique is acknowledging the limits of teacher control. Epictetus pointed out that some things are under our control and some things are not. It sounds kind of obvious, right? But we actually tend to think that way more stuff is under our control than is. Epictetus identified the things which are under our control as our opinions, actions, impulses, desires, and aversions. Everything else, he noted, including the actions and opinions of other people, are outside your control. If you decide to want things outside your control and you fail to get them, you'll experience negative emotions such as frustration or annoyance. But if you identify the things under your control and those things which are not, you can then focus your efforts on affecting the former and not waste your time worrying about the latter. Although this technique can be applied by anyone in any situation, I've adapted it specifically for teaching. When planning a class, you can go through your lesson plan and acknowledge where you've got control and where you don't. For example, during the first stage of an online class, you may be planning to tell students to switch on their cameras. For this step, you have control of the request itself, but not whether students actually turn on their cameras. You also have control over your opinion about those students who do not turn their cameras on. You can decide to accept this rather than just getting frustrated. By working through a lesson plan in this way, you can identify the parts that you can control and then ignore the bits that are not up to you. Okay, so that's the 2 Stoic practices for teachers, TNV and acknowledging the limits of your control. But did they actually work? Next, I'll tell you about the experiment that I did to find out. So the effects of 2 Stoic techniques were measured for 2 live 90-minute online classes, which I taught using Zoom during the autumn semester from September 2020 to the end of January 2021. English Through Songs had 38 students. English Debate only had 5. I practiced both techniques for 10 minutes per technique in the hour prior to one of the classes each week. To remove the effects of other variables, the class prior to which the practice took place alternated each week. For example, in week 1, I practiced before English Through Songs and not before English Debate, which you can see there. But in week 2, this was reversed. In this way, I hoped any results would be due to the Stoic techniques rather than other factors. Also, after both classes, I made detailed notes as well as a during class subjective well-being rating from 0, stressed out and unhappy, to 10, calm and happy. Okay, so that was the design of this action research study. So what about the results? Did the Stoic techniques have any effect? Let's take a look. First of all, in-class well-being. So these were the ratings that I gave after each class from 0, unhappy, to 10, happy. Here are the 2 plots for the during class well-being scores. The blue plot is for classes when the Stoic techniques were practiced, and the red line is for when no Stoic practice was used. When the Stoic techniques were used in class, when the Stoic practice techniques were used, in-class well-being scores were consistently higher than for those classes when they were not used. On top of that, the margin between the 2 sets of scores increased as the semester progressed. This suggests that using the 2 techniques had the intended effect of reducing the negative impact on well-being during the classes. So what about the effects of the Stoic practice? Well, on all 14 occasions when the class was preceded by Stoic practice, I wrote that they'd helped in some way to reduce negative emotions. Both techniques were particularly effective at lessening the impact of specific problems during class. For example, after English through songs, class 7, I wrote, just focusing for a few minutes on what might go wrong and the limits of my control really helped me. Very stressful event today. Literally 5 minutes before class, Zoom just froze. I had to shut down my computer and restart everything. I stayed really calm, got on with the job of rebooting. The students all rejoined, and we actually lost only a few minutes of class time. So this suggests that both considering what might go wrong and recognizing the limits of control had a beneficial effect and reduced the impact of a potentially very stressful event. Oops. So what about negative teacher visualization? So technique 1, negative visualization. It also seemed to be effective in its aim of increasing my appreciation of the teaching and working environment. In English Debate Week 8, I wrote in my journal, I practiced thinking about those parts of the teaching environment for which I was grateful. I thought about how hard the students tried to speak only English during the 10-minute debate stage in recent classes. I also looked around at my neat, organized, and well-equipped office and tried to imagine what it would be like to have to teach in the living room at home. When the class started, I felt more appreciative and relaxed. I think this was due, at least in part, to the 10 minutes spent doing TMV. And then in week 11 for English through songs, the TMV seemed to be really effective today. I tried something a bit different. I focused on my students' attitudes. It's a large group, but in general, most of the students are really trying during class and with the homework. For the TMV, I imagined what it would be like if all the students were unmotivated and lazy. I'm sure that this had the effect of making me more appreciative of the effort many students are making, and it helped me not to dwell on the few students who aren't trying. So imagining the teaching situation being worse than it actually is helped me appreciate the positives of the situation and be less prone to stress when things didn't go as planned. And the second technique, how about that one? Acknowledging the limits of teacher control. So in week 9 for English through songs, I wrote in the journal, before class I spent 10 minutes going through the aims for my class. I tried to focus on making the aims within my control. For example, I wanted students to actively participate in the small group discussions and to only speak English, but I can't control if they do or not. So I reformulated the aim to encourage students as much as I can to participate and speak only English. This helped me relax during class. At least I felt a slightly lower level of frustration when some students didn't follow the instructions. And then towards the end of the semester, week 13 for English through songs, I wrote, I was so relaxed in class today, and I'm sure it's connected to letting go of everything that I don't have control over. There were a few times when I might have normally felt frustrated or even a bit angry, but I just let it go. I'm sure this technique is working and that it becomes more effective with more practice. So these journal excerpts are just 2 examples from numerous instances when I could feel the beneficial effects of acknowledging control. Thinking about what I actually had control over before and during a class helped to lower my levels of frustration and stress. Okay, so the overall aim of this study was to investigate the negative influence of remote teaching on teachers' emotional well-being and to measure the efficacy of Stoic practices to alleviate them. So what did I find out? What are the answers to my research questions? The first question, what are the negative effects of teaching online on subjective well-being? So the teacher survey results showed that many teachers in the sample were suffering from negative emotional effects, such as loneliness, stress, anxiety, and anger due to online teaching during the pandemic. Next question, what causes these negative effects? The data from the survey indicates that causes related to online teaching, such as reduced contact with students and colleagues and increased workload, were responsible for these negative effects. What are teachers doing to mediate these negative effects? It's also clear from the survey results that teachers had used a range of strategies, including exercise, focusing on the positives, and reaching out to others to help them cope with the emotional and psychological strain of online teaching. And the last question: can practicing Stoic techniques alleviate these negative effects? So the results of the journaling study suggest that practicing techniques adapted from Stoic philosophy help to reduce the negative impact of online teaching for me. So it can be tentatively concluded that these techniques could also help other teachers reduce the negative impact of online teaching on their mental health. Moreover, given the inherently stressful nature of teaching, these techniques may also be of benefit for regular face-to-face teaching as well. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, has anybody got any questions?
No, but I'm pretty sure you probably already prepared for that possibility, right?
Hey, Philip. Hi there.
Sorry, just making a joke.
Have you got a question?
No, it was pretty straightforward.
Great.
Oh, I have a question.
Hey, Heidi.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I like the
Thanks.
idea of thinking about the things that you have control over rather than the things that you don't for your goals for the class.
Yeah.
And,
Great.
Yeah. Personally, I think I can try and incorporate that myself. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm glad.
Yeah. No question though. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody, any question?
Bob,
Hey, Brian.
if I may.
All right, mate.
Very good. Sorry. Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'll have to say.
you.
Thanks for that. Your respondents for both your survey and for your interview, were they all, how would I say, non-Japanese foreigners?
I didn't actually have an item in the survey for that to check that, but I'm assuming the majority were, because it was on the OTJ Facebook group, and it was kind of inclined to non-Japanese teachers, at least,
Right.
English teachers. But yeah, I didn't have that on the survey.
Yeah, no, it's more of a, how to say, kind of a cultural issue. It'd be interesting, I think, with Stoicism to compare it to the Japanese concept of gaman. You know how Japanese, the whole notion of gaman and perseverance and putting up with things
Yeah, totally.
It'd be quite interesting to, if you could do that maybe in the future, to compare like natives or if you like Japanese and foreigners in terms of their attitude, both to Stoicism and to gaman, I suppose,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Shogunai as well, I think it's a common Japanese saying, and that's sort of acknowledging, well, there's nothing I can do. It's out of my control.
Which would be interesting, because then you could delve into how far does that, belief that it's out of their control, how much control do they think they have, and how much control do they assume they don't have, as it were. Is there any kind of cultural or social specific influences there as well, or society influences?
Yeah, I agree. That'd be really interesting to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Very interesting, honestly.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, there's a question in the chat.
Oh, is there? Thank you. So Paul asked, have you taught these techniques to your students? That's a really good question. The simple answer is no. But, I think you know, these techniques are very useful for everybody. So I think it's an interesting idea to try to teach them to your students as well. And I'm sure they'd benefit for them as well, but I haven't as yet. Thanks, Paul.
I have a question now.
Hey, Heidi, great.
If you were going to recommend one practice to all teachers short before class to do, what would it be?
From these two, you mean? Which one was most effective? I think it's the control is the biggest one, I think, for me, because you know, and practicing doing it as well, you just get into the habit of doing it. So you know, if you haven't done this before, then it's not always clear where the limit of control lies. And if you get into the habit of doing it, then you just do it sort of automatically, you know. And a good example is like your goals for the class. Instead of the goal being, you know, student performance or their behavior, if you set the goal within your limit of control, then it's always about, you know, what you can do to try to maximize the outcome. So you do that, that's all you can do. Whatever happens, you're sort of quite relaxed about the outcome, I suppose. So yeah, that one, limits of control, is the most powerful, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that's 25 minutes. I think we're out of time. But thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it. Take care. And give it a try. Please give it a try.